Okay, so one really common thing to do when you're programming is swap the value of two variables. Probably haven't seen a great need for it yet, but when we move into sorting algorithms in our next class, this will become more important. And there's actually a swap function which is located in a library called algorithm, which allows you to do this easily. But it's really kind of a classic example of why to use reference parameters, so I'm going to demonstrate it here. So in this case, x is 5 and y is 10. What if we want to swap or exchange those values? So if we want to make x become 10 and y become 5, how can we do that? So I'm going to write a function and I'm going to call it, I'll just call it swap ints. And the reason, like I said, there is a swap function in the algorithm library. So I'm just going to use x and y. I'm going to pass those in. And let's just talk about the concept of a swap. You can't just do, let's say this, okay? Because if x is 5 and y is 10, when you do this, x will become 10 and the 5 is completely gone. So the trick here is to create a temporary variable. And you want it to be the same type of these variables, right? So an integer, I'll just call it temp. And what we do is we say temp is assigned the value of x. So now this temporary variable holds that value of x, which is 5. And then we can take what's in y and put it in x. So we can take that 10 and put it in x. And then y gets assigned the value of what's in temp. So it's just a little trick. You create a separate storage location to hold that first value temporarily. Now, when we look at this, x and y are going to be changed when this function is complete. So we want to send out these changed values, right? So this is a good example of when to use a reference parameter. X and y are being passed into the function. Initially they're 5 and 10, but they're being changed, right, to 10 and 5, and we want those new values to come back out, so these have to be reference parameters. So I'm going to copy this heading, paste it at the top, and put add my prototype, and then I'm going to call my function. And since I used reference parameters, they should be swapped when they come back. So let me just add a little code here. I'll say originally, x should be 5 and y is 10. Then we're going to call the swap function. And then hopefully when we come back from that function, I'll just change this to after swapping. Okay, now let's run this. So originally x is 5 and y is 10. After swapping, x is 10 and y is 5. So that does work. Okay. If we leave off these ampersands, these are now value parameters. What happens with value parameters is it takes this x, right, here, which is 5, it passes it into x. With a value parameter, it's actually a new memory location called x in the function, and then the same thing with y. It's a value parameter. It'll pass the 10 into here. It'll go through all of this, and it will change x and y, but when the function leaves, they don't go back to main. There's no ampersand. So if I run it like this, I mean, it still runs, but you'll see here x is 5 and y is 10, and x is 5 and y is 10. So in order for those new values to, be returned back to main, we need to have the ampersand here denoting that they were changed and they're going to be sent back, so they need to be reference parameters. So let's make sure this runs again, which I believe it does. Okay, and it does. So it's kind of an example that's shown a lot in computer science and in programming when you want to demonstrate why reference parameters are helpful. Just the other thing I'd like to talk about here is, we've been talking about, when you have a prototype, you take the heading and you copy it and you paste it up here and you put a semicolon at the end. And that's kind of easy for beginning programmers, right? It's kind of hard to mess that up. But technically in the prototype, the variable names themselves, only in the prototype, are optional. Okay, they still have to be in the heading. They're not optional down here. So if you prefer to do it that way, it's fine. And you can still do this if they're reference parameters, right? It'll just look like this, right? This just shows it's an integer reference parameter. And when you're making reference parameters, this space here is optional. That will still work. A lot of times you like to put a space in on either side of the operators just to clarify. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what that would look like with reference parameters. Like that. Okay. And that's a swap.